The problem is of Richard doing the countdown on this thing to tee us up is he's from Cornwall, and his 6 fingers puts the rest of us behind. That's where it goes wrong, Callum. Right. Well, do you know what I'm going to do? So we make it flow, because this is the most popular rural podcast and also the slickest, as I'm sure anyone who hasn't listened before will be led to not believe.
Christ.
Is that we've got a guest, and a great guest, and it's someone who I've wanted to have on for quite a long while, Mike Warner. Now, Mike is, amongst other things, a fishmonger. He's a fisherman. He's the chairman of the Shellfish Association of Great Britain. He's got a strong farming background. I mean, if you were trying to say, let's have the perfect guest for CountrySlide, so we go from coast, shore, inland, farm, we've got this man. We've got the one fella who no one else has managed to get their mitts on. And Mike Warner, welcome to CountrySlide.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's an honour and a pleasure to be here.
Are you sure you want to go with a pleasure? You might want to retract that by the end of the episode.
No. I get pleased very easily.
I like the way Richard Negus was really happy with himself. He managed to get an intro quite well, and he was shocked himself.
Yes. Anyway, listen, because we want to get most of Mike's time, what I want to do is because I am always interested in what you two, who bizarrely are my friends, I would like to know what you have been up to this week. So I'm going to go, Callum, what have you been up to? And keep it brief so we can let Mike talk.
I know I have to keep this brief, but I've pretty much been out like every single day, and I tried to condense it down earlier to Richard Prideaux on the phone, and I just ended up making up stories.
I got angry with you and said, just pick one.
He's like Gimli from Lord of the Rings, really. He's like
6'2" Gimli.
Like an angry dwarf, but just a bit bigger.
Just angry then.
It's the tallest dwarf in Wales. So what have I been up to? I've been taking lots and lots of pictures. Had lots of commissions for people in London, PR stuff, and also editorial stuff, which involved various 1:30 a.m. starts for deer culls in Norfolk or Suffolk or something like that. So yeah, for all you deer perverts out there, expect to see lots of men walking into the distance with thermal sights in a variety of field sports magazines coming soon. The one I will pick as the most interesting is we had like 7 courses of deer offal in a wood over the weekend, and it was really interesting. This young lady, she is a butcher. You can follow her on Instagram. It's Falafel. Mm-hmm. Richard Prideaux does know who this person is.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She is actually amazing. I had a heart tartare, so that is raw heart with wild garlic and all sorts of lovely bits, and that was actually delicious. It's quite hard to eat 6 courses of offal because it is so incredibly rich. But we had, a classic liver and bacon to finish, but we had all these delicious things, and it was such an amazing experience to go out and go from the freshest deer offal possible. And yeah, really exciting, and you will read about that and the full story in the field sometime middle of the year. So yeah, really excited for it. The pictures are amazing. Cool. I took far too many.
And now you've got
gout. I genuinely am looking forward to that, yeah.
Nearly. He says, sipping a Corona.
It was a short journey for you for gout anyway. I mean, it was always in the hovering around on the edges, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if I didn't have periods of extensive starvation, I probably would have gout, yeah.
You're just one big oxalic mass.
You ought to start one of those podcast things about, how I eat clean. And it's basically, your life is spent in your car eating pies interspersed by very fresh game, and then more pies in a car again. I mean, it's eat healthy. Richard, what have you been up to, my friend?
I'll have to pick which one of my 17 different consecutive careers I'm doing, and I'll go for this morning, assisted by my friend Hugh and the bloke who we talked about in last week's episode, who was nicking wood from the woods. We went out to various farms where we've been donated oak trees that came down in Storm Dara. So there's all these oak trees littering the fields, and because it's coming to the end of March, everybody wants to get them off the field so that they can grow silage or re-fence that bit because they want to put the lambs in there or something like that. So we've just been going from site to site to cut the butt off, cut the very bottom of the tree off, and cut it off just below where the branches come out on these huge oak trees. Some of them about 5 foot diameter. So we've got these 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot long sections of oak, 5 foot across, that we then tested the very limits of a JCB telehandler to see if we could lift them and move them across the field. You know, we had 1.5 wheels on the ground at one point, completely safe. We destroyed a 3-ton lifting strap, just completely detonated it. All very safe, as you can imagine.
Yeah, nothing can ping back at you in any way, shape or form, can it?
I was stood at least 2 meters away. It was fine. And one of us was wearing a helmet between all of us.
Did you have high vis? Because if you've got high vis, it's fine.
I had high vis in the car. So it was over there in the car. I had it with me.
Was someone there with a clipboard? I think if you have someone with a clipboard, everything's okay.
Amy was taking photos, if that helps. But we've got about 15 cubic meters of oak now, which...
Tell Amy the money's actually in the fail videos. So if she can video it next time, that's where she'll get the most leverage out of, the viral hog and stuff like that.
Yeah.
My 15 cubic meters of oak is my my nest egg. That's my that's my summer sorted. If I can sell it.
Marvellous.
In fact, I think we're just going to build a farm shop with it instead for my mate.
I know you all know this, but it's still stuck with me. I didn't realise Richard told me there was lots of different types of oak. I thought there was just oak, oaky oak, same old oak.
Oaky oak.
No.
There's lots of different types of oak.
Okie doke.
How many varieties are there, Richard? There's a lot, aren't there?
I told him 20 earlier, then I named about 12. I think it might be more like 15 or so. But it depends whether you include home oaks and stuff like that in, because they're the weird evergreens. And
Oh, I've seen those in London.
Yeah.
we got a load of red oak in the forest.
Yeah, we have those down here in Suffolk as well. Red oak grows quite well. And it's a beautiful tree. I mean, I think ash, they have managed to work out there's something like with ash trees, there's 450 something DNA differentials between different ones. So therefore, that's why when you go into a wood and you think ash dieback, ash dieback, ash dieback, why is that one living? It doesn't make any sense, and it's because its DNA is slightly different. And that's one of the projects that they're trying to work on at the moment, is looking at the DNA of trees that can survive this stuff. Because we have, curiously, here in Suffolk, and we lay a lot of elm hedges here. And they have to be elm hedges because once they grow over 16 foot, the Dutch elm beetle gets in and then they wither and die. So if you treat them as a hedge plant, brashy hedge plant, they coppice back very, very readily. If you keep them below that height, they carry on living. If you let them go above it, the Dutch elm beetle gets in. But there are these anomalies. And weirdly, around Sudbury Way and heading towards sort of Hitcham, this sort of part of Suffolk, you're getting monumental-sized elms. And there's a chap who I came across via the power of Twitter who wants me to get some core samples of some of these elms so that he can analyse why these things live, because theoretically they shouldn't. And he's wondering whether there is a sort of a curious anomaly of why they live here, or is it soil conditions? But it can't be soil conditions because you will go out into the hedgerows and quite frequently see just elms die. But sometimes there are these individual elm trees which carry on living despite all things. So what I've been doing, therefore, is my usual stuff: hedges, So if you want to know what I've been doing, hedge laying. That's it.
I-
It's nearly the end of the season.
I was about to ask.
Oh, that was so profesh. Honestly, we are getting so good at this.
Dear listeners, if you want to tell us about the ash or the elm in your area and the weird resistance ones, let us know. Email us. There's an email address in the show notes. Tell us what's happening with your trees. We'll talk about it in a future episode. But all you've done is hedge laying. Is that it?
We had some film chaps come today. Really lovely chap called Jack Burke, who's a bit of a sort of top chef for private diners in swanky bits of London. And he also makes films, sort of documentary films. And they came to talk to Goldie and I today about hedge laying. And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to be about half an hour. They came along, chatted us, and it ended up about 3 hours. So I actually didn't finish laying this particular hedge until 4:30. So I had to hightail it back to record this at breakneck speed, obviously staying within the speed limit, officer, to get back. But no, they came to talk to us about, because what they're interested in is that obviously with the current political climate and that there's no money in the countryside anymore and farmers are all tearing their hair out and thinking, what the hell are we going to do? They want to talk to practical conservationists who are tasked with doing nature recovery in farmland and say, what do we do now? So that was largely it. So it's hedge laying plus a little bit of people coming to see if our faces might look good in a documentary. And also I spoke with my publisher, because I don't think I've mentioned this, but I've got a book coming out.
I've heard you had a book coming out. What's it about?
That's shocking news.
Yeah, well, it's about hedges. It's called Words from the Hedge.
And when's it out?
May the 1st. Yeah, May the 1st in all good bookshops.
Right.
And I'm going to go and see it roll off the presses in Bungay, of all places. So just down the road from me, is going to come off the presses at Clay's of Bungay, and they've asked me to go and watch it roll off. And I think also it's so off because I've got to sign all the pre-ordered copies. And unbelievably, 1,600 people, the fools, have already pre-ordered the thing. So I've got to sign my name, lots of love, Richard, 1,600 times. So I'm going to have sort of an arm like that from writing rather than wielding my billhook. Anyway, that's what I've been up to.
Well, I'm fed up of hearing about trees and deer and hedges. Can we talk about something that involves nothing to do with tree, deers and hedges, please?
Yes. So, Mike, you were a farmer and then you went into fish. So tell us why the sea drew you back.
I thought you were going to ask me what I've been doing today because I've been cutting up a tree.
Oh, for God's sake.
What? Oh, God, not another one of those.
Go on.
We don't want to talk about trees. Shut up, Mike. Go away.
Was it at sea? Were you turning it into a fishing boat?
I was going to say I've got wood as well,
Oh.
but
What?
I didn't know whether that was allowed.
That's just Callum. That's Callum has that effect on everybody.
Listen, no, I have literally been cutting up a tree today. But that aside, you want to talk about my passion for seafood, don't you?
Well, tell us about yourself. Wow.
So yeah, how long have we got? Here we go. I grew up close to Felixstowe Ferry. Richard will know that. Know that well in Suffolk on the Heritage Coast, and Felixstowe Ferry in those days was a thriving little fishing hamlet. And of course, as a boy, growing up next to the sea for a start, and then also in a little fishing hamlet like that, I was exposed to very good seafood and the ways of the fishermen from a very early age. My father fished, very great friend of his fished as well, and so I was out on the water from quite a young age, and had a little dinghy and my own lobster pots, which I was given some. When I was about 12 years old, I was given some lobster pots to sort of cobble together and mend, and I fished them from our beach out at Felixstowe, just on the seafront there. And yeah, it was an idyllic childhood, really. And that, they say the salt water is in your blood, and you never, once you've heard the sigh of the sea, it always stays with you, and it's all very sort of romantic. But actually, there's a lot of truth in that. And then I found myself, all these years later, following a 30-year career in agriculture, just wanting to get back to what I first knew and what I first loved. But yeah, it's quite a thing to want to do that and make a go of it. When you were quite secure and successful in the career that you had, which I was. But hey ho, these things are sent to try us, and I took the plunge, and actually it's been fantastic. The last 10 years have been amazing, and I haven't looked back at all.
Where and why and how did you make the decision to leave the sea? See, my family are all from Southwold, and my family left the coast because it was an impoverished place. Southwold's posh, it always was posh.
Yeah.
But my family left the sea because there was no money in it. Is that what led you to go to to farming?
Yeah, pretty much. So I think that's a pretty good summation, really, because I got, I was always on the beach, but I also had this love for farming as well. So in Felixstowe, where I was growing up, we were right on the outskirts of the town, so there was farmland right behind us, and I spent a lot of time sort of messing about on a local dairy farm and helping milk the cows and with harvest and things. And so a typical day for me when I was about 12, 13, 14 would, in the summer holidays, would be up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going to sea with Dougie Goodall, who's a fisherman at Felixstowe Ferry, going lobstering with him, coming ashore about 11 o'clock, cycling like mad down to the beach hut, getting in my dinghy and going and hauling my own lobster pots and rebaiting them, coming back to the beach hut, having a bit of lunch, onto the bike, down to Golfer Farm at Felixstowe, at the back of Felixstowe, and milking the cows. And it was day in, day out like that, when the weather was good. And it was just magical, I mean, what more could a boy, growing up in the countryside and the coast want for, being subjected to those two disciplines, the sea on one hand and the farm on the other, both producing food. And I suppose that really, sort of set the hook in me, if you like. Got to about 18 when I was due to leave school, and had the chat as you always do, and I could have easily gone into fishing. I could have gone and probably had a share with one of the fishermen at Felixstowe Ferry, or taken over a business there, or certainly been part of one. But no, it was agriculture, which looked as if it was going to be the better career path. And so off I went to Harper Adams Agricultural College, and did not a degree, did an HND in those days, and had 3 fantastic years there, and came back straight into farm management, back into Suffolk actually, and ended up at a little village called Blacksall, which is near Snape, if you know where that is, Richard.
Well, I know very well. I mean, that's Ask the Fellows Who Cut the Hay territory, isn't it? I mean, that is Blacksall is.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Georgia at Evans.
Georgia at Evans. So, I mean, arguably one of the more famous villages in Suffolk because of this wonderful book in my book, which I know I never talk about, I do that because I've laid some hedges near Blacksall, but I also think that fantastic narrative that he had of these old boys who worked the land, having seen when they were in their younger years, everything was horse-drawn. Then in their middle time, when they were really fit and well, they were seeing steam. And then towards the twilight of their agricultural careers, in came diesel-powered tractors. I mean, what a maelstrom. If we think we live in a rum old time now, I mean, God, they saw agricultural revolutions happening by each turning of the clock. Yeah, fascinating time.
Absolutely.
We've got some good stuff to talk about later on in the episode, because I know there's some things I really want to get onto. So maybe I should get the other stuff out of the way first. Mike, how are the British fisheries doing at the moment? At end of March 2025, how are things looking?
No, that's a good question. It's one I get asked a hell of a lot. I mean, the good thing about our British fisheries is that we have what we call very diverse mixed fisheries, highly complex, but all around. We're island nation, collection of island nations, so we have very, very productive waters all around our coasts. I mean, thankfully we benefit from the Gulf Stream, from the North Atlantic Drift, which which provides a huge amount of nutrition, phytoplankton, all the stuff that the food chain requires. Surrounding certainly on the western side, and then just coming around the top from Shetland down into the North Sea. So we're very, very lucky that we have an abundance of species. In terms of the state of the health of the stocks, it's pretty good. It really is. I mean, we've taken a huge sort of step forward in terms of how we manage our fisheries, and the advancement of technologies to sort of facilitate that. Reduction of bycatch and targeting certain species with different sorts of gear. So actually, we have probably some of the best managed fisheries in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. But having said that, there is always a proviso that fishermen, being fishermen, and being competitive and wanting to get the most for what they're doing, will target certain species where perhaps there aren't the management sort of strategies in place and that's not their fault. That's a product and a demand of the market, which is dictating they do that, and I'll come on to why that is in a minute. But the quotas and the management of these fisheries are determined by science, and by international bodies such as ICES, which is the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas, and they set national quotas all around, or international quotas around the world, and then it's up to our scientists and DEFRA to determine how those quotas should be apportioned according to our local science. And the trouble is that science is quite often 2 years out of date. So what the fishermen are seeing on the ground is not necessarily reflected in the quota. If you get what I'm saying.
That was going to be my next question then. Is there a sort of a three-way split between what the fishermen are seeing out on the boats and seeing in their catch every day, the policy that's being made, and the science and the studies that are being done on those stock numbers? Is it that the three are very difficult to line up because the time between discovering a new way of measuring something to it being implemented in a policy that affects the person dragging in the catch, it's almost too late?
It is, and added into that, Richard, you've got the cyclical nature of fish populations. You've got natural, what we call mortality. So that can be through predation, or just could be through die-off or interspecies competition. And then you've got recruitment, which is it's obviously the recharging of those fish populations through spawning. And that's not always set in stone. That can be a cyclical thing. It can be affected by water temperature. Generally, the seas are warming. That they have warmed in the past, they will warm again. It's not, well, we could do, this is another podcast really, but fish, will and shellfish are slowly, species are slowly moving further north. Cod, for example, take a very basic species there. The cod populations that we used to see when I was a boy in Suffolk, are no longer there. Yes, because of overfishing. Yes, because of spatial competition, offshore energy, things which are environmental issues which have created a problem for those species, but also water temperature. So they are moving slowly further north. So you throw all those things into the mix, plus your science, plus your management, plus your quotas, who'd be a fisherman? It is a bloody hard job. And then you've got the weather.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing, is that what you're saying there is that these are two things. You say market-driven is one thing about what people want to buy, and the seasonality of it. Now, that seems to be the same thing that affects a lot of farming, is that the consumer has been persuaded by the retailer that seasonality is not a thing. You can have strawberries in December if you want them, because by God, we'll import them from somewhere. And so the market seems to be driven by the retailer. So what I'm quite interested to know is, like you say, we here in the UK, from the sound of it, we've actually still got some decent fish stocks. We've still got the resource. Why the hell are we not eating more fish? And why is it that, I mean, I'm going to mention him quite frequently throughout this. My cousin Gary, who you know, who I believe has hauled you out of the sea once before when he was the coxswain of the Southwold lifeboat. So, I mean, you surely owe me a favour there, Mike. I mean, it must be. I want to see some fish heading my way for that, just by familial association. But is that he's catching sole, flounder, skate, and a few other flatfish. That's largely what he's catching there. But he's saying that half the fish that he catches are never going to even see the platters of people in this country. They're going to go to the diners in France and Spain. So why have we stopped eating when we've got this sustainable seasonal bounty? Why are we not eating it, do you think?
So you've touched on it there already, Richard. It's the commoditization of seafood by the retailer, which has driven this cultural shift. You're right. Gary will be catching Dover soles. That's probably one of his most profitable catches, really. And I can tell you now that those Dover soles he lands will go into the chiller at Southwold, and they'll be picked up by not a lorry from Lowestoft, but they'll be picked up by a lorry from Brixham, which has come up via Hastings twice a week, and those soles will go back down to Brixham and be sold on the market there, which is an electronic auction, which is open to international buyers, and I can guarantee that most of those soles will go to Holland. So that's where the buyers are. Now, this actually, you go back to your original question, why don't we eat more seafood? We have a paradox in the UK. 80% of what we catch in the UK goes abroad. Virtually the same amount, virtually 80% of what we consume comes from abroad. And that 80% of what we consume is across 5 species, what I call the infamous 5, and that's cod, haddock, salmon, tuna, and prawns. And they can come from all over the world. Our cod and haddock that you'll see in a fish and chip shop is 90% of the time has come from Norway, Iceland, Faroes, Russia. You know, it's not come from Peterhead. Yes, we do have some, obviously, which comes back into the domestic market, but we are not geared up for selling freshly, portioned and sized fish, which the Norwegians can do on their factory ships at sea, frozen at sea, and we just don't have that facility. All our fish is processed ashore. So, yeah, just to come back to your question, yeah, we've lost the art. We've lost the knack of eating our own seafood in favour of these commodities.
So there's an ability. So there's a problem with the processing as part of. Is it the demand, or we're just not geared up for it? The structure's not there.
We're not geared up for it. I mean, virtually all our fish is landed fresh, so we don't have the processing at sea like some of the Icelandic nations and the Norwegians and some of the other Scandinavians. So we don't actually process fish at sea. It comes ashore, it goes on a market, and then goes either exported via a merchant or via an international buyer, or it goes to other merchants within the UK. And yeah, I mean, a lot of it ends up in restaurants in London, but a hell of a lot ends up abroad. Longestine, for example, 80% of those that get landed into Scotland, either via trawl or via creels, will go abroad. And we go on holiday to the Med. We'll sit in a little taverna or a bistro or whatever, and we'll be eating calamari and crab and lobster and longestine. And of course, virtually all of it's come from the UK. And then we come home and eat tuna again and salmon.
No way. I didn't know that.
You mentioned the top 5 there for British fish protein, where it comes from. What would, in an ideal world, or at least as I see it, and everything's coming from the British waters, what would be a top 5 for the UK then?
I think 2 of them are there, cod and haddock, but just be nice to be able to utilize our own catch. I think oily fish, well, for me, it's got to be herring. I mean, we have so many herring in the sea at the moment. A friend of mine just been fishing this week in Lowestoft. I mean, they're catching for a very short 3-hour tow. They're catching about 2-3 tons of herring. It's getting landed onto Lowestoft Quay. and it's going off for pet food at about 40p a kilo to get frozen down into blocks.
Oh,
Pet food.
Yeah,
No
and
way.
that's an interesting thing, Mike, because I mean the prosperity of places like Lowestoft, Southwold, a lot of our Suffolk and Norfolk fishing ports, the prosperity of those places was made upon the herring.
very much so.
And what the hell happened? Why did that stop? Because we keep getting told by all the health food and health people, and well, look at the Japanese, they live until they're 130 because they eat oily fish. And so everyone knows this thing, but they'd rather pop a cod liver oil tablet down their throat than eat a herring. So what caused that shift, do you think?
I mean, the herring, you're quite right. I mean, communities and society has been around the North Sea, Scandinavia, France, Holland, us. All these back across the centuries, herring was the thing. It was a tradable commodity. A lot of our herring was even back in the 1500s when Henry VIII was on the throne. That's why the Royal Navy came into existence, because it was to protect our herring fleets from the marauding Dutch. So we, over this time, the herring has been
always the Dutch.
It's always the Dutch. Yeah. Herring has been such a major feature in our diet and our society. By the turn of the 19th century and the 20th century, we had a massive herring fleet. So if you think now, we probably have about, I don't know, 9,000-10,000 fishermen in total in the UK. We had 10,000 involved in the herring fishery then, in the early 1900s. We had the Herring Marketing Board. Herring was being exported. It was being consumed locally. It was a protein staple, a dietary staple for us. But 2 world wars intervened. Fishing techniques became more efficient. We had diesel engines instead of steam, so steam drifters became diesel trawlers. And after the Second World War, the effort on the herring stocks increased, not exponentially, but increased to a point where those herring stocks became under significant pressure, and so the herring stocks started to decline throughout the 50s and 60s, and in the 1970s they issued a ban on all herring fishing in the North Sea. And what happened then was that any herring that we wanted for our domestic market, for kippers or any sort of production, would come from Iceland, Norway, and the Barents Sea, where herring was still okay. But in that time, a generation sort of missed out on eating herring, fresh herring, and of course the processors disappeared. And once your processors disappear at a fishing port, that's it. You turn to another species or it dies. And of course, for places like Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, without the herring, Lowestoft was different because it had a whitefish fleet as well. So there was an awful lot of plaice and cod being landed, and flatfish being landed into Lowestoft. But once the herring went, then the faces of these fishing communities changed dramatically. Fast forward to today, herring are back, but there's no market.
And it had a knock-on effect as well to elsewhere, because when those herring disappeared and the supply dropped, then the market does what it does, and it goes out looking for a replacement or an alternative. And then the places that are still producing it, but maybe at smaller scale, just even if they still have the herring, just they've lost their route to market straight away. They've lost their buyer, and they have a domino effect. That was what happened in Cornwall, particularly places like Mevagissey or some, the villages I grew up near, that the herring market kind of collapsed, even though they still had a herring to land.
Exactly that. It collapsed nationally. And, as you say, herring down on the south coast and the north coast of Devon, places like Clovelly, and Scotland on the west coast still had plenty of herring. But, of course, the demand had fallen away.
My only experience with eating herring was trying a roll mop as a dare and using them as pike fishing bait, which I have to say they are quite good for. But how, like, what's the best way to eat herring? And if you were to,
What would
to
you do
have
to a
that-
herring?
yeah, what would you do to a herring to make it not a roll mop? Is what I'm asking.
The flavour of the things is incredible. It's straight out of the water. I don't think you've seen my little. I made a little mini documentary on herring a few years ago, called Silver Darlings, and it's on YouTube, and it's worth having a look at because I go out with a boat from Felixstowe Ferry and we catch herring in an old drift net method, and then we go back onto the mooring and we cook it up and eat it on board, and it shows you the whole process, and it's quite interesting
Amazing.
it tells you the story of what I've just sort of gone over really. But no, for me, herrings, the way I like to cook them is a bit like the French way of cooking a whiting, which they call whiting en couleur, which is pinning the head to the tail with a cocktail stick, and then baking with lemon and tomato and just a bit of sea salt and some black pepper, and then unpinning it and then just taking the meat off the bone. And I mean, it's just incredible nutrition in a tiny little package, a superfood.
There's a German one which you do with, I think you pickle them in vinegar, effectively. And there's like a brothering. But it's one of those things that sounds awful, but when you try it, it's actually quite good because the acidity of the vinegar really offsets the oiliness of the herring. Yeah, and then there's also smoking as well, which is there seems to be this massive trend back towards smoking everything that people can: fish, meat, vegetables, bread,
you name it.
Gins, you can get smoked gins. So
the herring, I think, should play a huge part in our diet still. It's incredibly versatile, and people like mackerel. I mean, look what they've done down in Cornwall, Richard, with the pilchard, which is now the Cornish sardine.
Yeah.
Which they've rebranded, and of course people, oh yes, you must go and try the Cornish sardines. They're selling it, but if you said pilchards, people would just put their nose in the air. So
Doesn't it feel a bit like old people food? That this is the same resistance we have with offal, because like you say liver and bacon, you think, oh, my nan used to have that. Ugh, disgusting. It's like there's this thing where it's skipped a couple of generations, and now it's like, oh no, that's not normal. That's weird food.
I mean, there's a great quote from dear old Keith Floyd, who when he was doing his series back in, was it 1984, something like that, Floyd on Fish, and he said, when it comes to eating seafood, we've lost the nerve of our grandparents, and I think that still holds true.
Where can I actually buy herring if I want to? I'm going to try it. I'm seriously, I'm going to give it a go. Where can I actually buy herring?
This is the problem. I mean, any independent fishmonger these days will not be able to get it. I mean, we sell herring in the shop, but that's only because I can buy it straight off the boat. The trouble is now and this is where fisheries management, progressive management, impacts on fishing as well. We can't drift net like we used to. They've changed the mesh size of a lot of these net. We can't fish for sprats anymore with a drift net because we might get bass or sea trout bycatch in it or whatever. So a lot of these little opportunities which were left to fishermen are no longer there. So if you want to catch herring now, you've got to trawl for them really. And actually, fishermen like Gary are not going to waste their time trawling for herring at 40p a kilo when they can go and catch Dover soles. So actually that supply of herring is really difficult to get a hold of.
Is there any benefit to leaving more herring, in terms of getting certain predators, or is there any benefit to that?
The good thing is the herring have bounced back. We've got a lot of feedstock in the North Sea. We've got a lot of mackerel, and we've got a lot of scad and pilchards down on the south coast. And of course, that brings in predators, that brings in other fish species. And what we're experiencing now, certainly down in the southwest, although we have actually seen them up in the North Sea, is the resurgence of the bluefin tuna, which is coming back into our waters just because of that reason, just because the feedstocks are there for it.
Wow.
And we now, for the first time last year, had our first commercial rod and line fishery for bluefin tuna. 13 licenses issued by the MMO, and mostly down in Newlyn in Cornwall, and rod and line boats going out. And it's another great. It's a positive thing. It's a great catch opportunity.
So they're allowed to now catch bluefin tuna in
Yeah.
Cornwall commercially
they
and
can,
sell
yeah.
them. And where are they going to?
Well, at the
end up?
moment, they're ending up in sort of London restaurants and things. But the trouble with bluefin is because we're not used to catching it and handling it and preparing it, and it has to be prepared in a high care environment. We can't achieve the
Yeah, I
same
bet.
sort of levels of quality that you get with the Japanese tuna. So the same sort of fat levels and things like that, because they will actually catch their tuna and then ranch them in huge pens and feed them up, so they actually get more fat in them. We haven't got the fat content right in our tuna yet, so we don't get the same price. So
No.
a bluefin being landed on Newland Market might make, I don't know, £8-10 a kilo, as opposed to 50, 60, 70, £100 a kilo for the the Japanese bluefin.
Wait, they catch them and fatten them
Yeah,
up?
they do. Yeah.
This is.
I never. Well, I
I have
never.
never heard of anything like it. That's
It's called ranching.
going deer stalking and then feeding it maize instead. What's going on? That's crazy. I didn't think they'd do that.
Well, perhaps that's my new market. I'm going to go and catch. I'm going to snare muntjac and then sneak out and then put them in the garden, feed them up on some high energy
Give 'em
horse
McNugget.
food. Exactly. So go on, you little mugger. Put some fat on.
See if we can feed them on some herring.
Yeah, feed them on herring.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Fish and bone.
Good for the
yeah,
for the
I like it.
coats. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. They will be glossy and fat.
Glossy fat munties.
We had these dudes come out today to come and sort of see if we're going to be photogenic enough to be filmed. And they came to the conclusion when we were talking about the woes of farming is that, yes, we can whinge about governments not giving us enough sufficient grants. We can whinge about various things where farming's gone wrong. But it seems to me that they raised it, that the supermarket has become such an all-powerful beast that they rule the roost on what we, the consumer, eat. And Callum asked the question, where can I buy herring? And the nearest fishmonger that we have to where I am in mid-Suffolk is, I think, Bury St Edmunds.
Yep.
I think that's the closest fishmonger we have.
Yeah, it'd be in the market there.
If I go to Morrison's in Diss, I can't buy in Diss in Norfolk, just over the border in Bandit country.
Innit?
Yeah.
Diss.
Right.
If I go to Diss and I buy that, which is my closest supermarket, you can't buy any fish that's worthy of the name, and it certainly wouldn't have very many Union Jacks floating at it, and you certainly couldn't buy a herring. You couldn't buy any of the shellfish that you are talking about. If I wanted to buy shellfish, the closest I'd probably have to do is go to Waitrose in Bury St Edmunds. Now, I took, for a Suffolk magazine article, I took a local chef in quite a posh pub restaurant down to go and meet us as Gary and I came in off the sea with his catch. And he was saying, well, oh, that skate looks lovely. And he said, well, how much is that going to be? And he said 50p. And he goes, what, a kilo? He goes, no, 50p for the whole thing. You can buy that. And it seems to be that if you go to the dock when he comes and lands, you can catch some fantastic bargains. But when you actually want to buy it, you either can't get it or it's so astronomically expensive that your average consumer is going to say, bugger it, I'll go to the chicken department.
Exactly.
So is the supermarket a killer?
Yeah.
Is that the killer for us, Mike?
Well, it is because, I mean, and you spoke about Morrison's there. Actually, Morrison's are one of the better ones. I mean, not necessarily in Diss, but certainly they bought out one of the fishery merchants down in Cornwall called Foulfish, which is actually now a part of Morrison's. So, they actually do get it to a degree. But the others just a bloody shower, because what they'll do, they've closed most of their fish counters down. Thank God, because they didn't know how to sell fish. You get a person at Tesco's trying to sell you, I don't know, haddock one day, and the next day they'll be trying to sell you cheese or tennis shoes or something else. No sort of discipline there. So that's what they've done, and they've gone down the frozen food route, and they're able to do that. And keep the volumes there they've led us down the route of things like frozen prawns, tin tuna, frozen fish fillets, stuff imported from around the world, pangasius, bassa, ridiculous bloody fish which are farmed, bass and bream, all farmed in the Mediterranean, where we've got these fantastic fish, all of those on our doorstep. Well, not the bassa and the pangasius, but we've got 40 to 50 different species being landed at places like Brixham or Newlyn commercially on an average, sort of on a good market day. And so, yeah, that's the way they've pushed us. We won't get those species. You won't find skate and dogfish and whiting and pouting and witch sole or megrim or anything on our supermarkets, because it's just been pushed out of the way. There's a much better trade for the fishermen or the buyers to export it to people who actually know what to do with it than to try and hawk it around the UK.
Freezing these fish, is that a good idea? Could that be a solution to it? Could you freeze herring and not have them as fresh
you can.
fish?
I mean, you can freezing. Yeah, exactly. You'd have to freeze them at source. That's where the Norwegians, like I spoke about, the frozen at sea fish. The cod fillets and haddock fillets and things like that. They get gutted and portioned up and then frozen straight away. Gets the flavour locked in. But
so then that means they're like food grade.
Yeah,
but then
exactly.
If you don't freeze them, they're like dog food.
Yeah, the trouble is with the British fleets, where so a trawler going out of Peterhead, for example, might be at sea for 7 to 10 days. Okay, so but all his fish is going to be iced up and then landed fresh. So the fish he catches on day one, okay, that gets iced up and put into the fish room. But if you try to freeze that down ashore, after it had been landed, compared to the fish that he caught on day 10, you've got a hell of a difference there in quality. And that's why our fish is landed and goes and gets processed fresh to go into the fresh market or processed market, rather than actually being frozen. You can freeze it, but you're not going to get that level of quality.
Is there an element as well that, because what you're competing against in terms of narrative is, or at least in terms of public perception, industry perception, and just when you're talking to, government departments and civil servants, that they're putting you alongside things like forestry or agriculture, where there are defined inputs and you put something in the ground and it grows and it costs this much to grow, and then you harvest it and it sells for this much.
Yeah.
Whereas fishery is entirely wild food. It is a huge ecosystem out there that you're going along and hopefully just scraping at the edges of, that it's very difficult for you to show, or for the fishing industry to show, where those rising costs are and to fit it into literally the models and the calculations that civil servants work to.
Yeah, it's a different industry. I mean, we have, in terms of civil servants, obviously we're governed by DEFRA and then the MMO, the Marine Management Organisation, who are the specialist arm of fisheries management and policy and enforcement. Nonetheless, it's not like having an organisation run by people who actually, dare I say, know what's actually going on the ground. I mean, they do their best with their resources that they have, but there is still that disconnect there, not just between the consumer and the fisherman, between the policymakers and the fishermen as well. And that's what you've got to try and get over. I mean, you're right. It's a wild environment, but actually it's still a managed environment. You're still. We talk about fishermen being the last of the wild hunters, but we still have to manage that environment. And the trouble with fishing at the moment, there are too many other people or too many other industries wanting a portion of the sea. And that's what we call spatial competition. So offshore energy, gravel extraction.
Okay. So those sorts of other people who are now increasingly fighting for that space, they are great impactors. And so therefore, I mean, Gary's always talking about what those wind turbines have done to the cod stock. What have they done?
So, I mean, taking the offshore energy sector as an example, and Gary's absolutely right, and I hear this anecdotally from fishermen all the time. What you've got there are those wind farms on the Gabbard and the Galloper and those big sandbanks offshore, and there's two or three things there which are affecting not just the fish populations, but the hydrology of the ocean, of the sea as well. So you've got, firstly, you've got where the cabling runs ashore. That should be mould into the seabed, but often it's left exposed or it's been eroded. So you've got these cables just laying on the seabed, and round each one of those is an electromagnetic field. And of course, that is well, not of course, but we found out that that's acting as a barrier to fish transference, so longitudinally parallel to the shoreline. So species like demersal species, the bottom feeding ones like soles and skate and cod and things like that, find it very hard to pass those electromagnetic fields and find another route round. And of course, you've got a lot of noise, a lot of commotion. You throw a rock into a pond, what happens to the fish? They disappear, don't they? So that's one aspect of it. But then more recently, we've found that scientists have found, certainly at Heriot-Watt University in Scotland, are looking at the effect of tide on the wind farms as it goes backwards and forwards, creates what we call a sediment plume. So obviously these things are on sand and mud. You get as the tide washes back across the base, if you like, of the turbine, it brings up sediment into the water column, and that sediment then gets dispersed, either north or south, depending on which way the tide's flowing. And what they've found is that it's affecting the oxygen concentration in the water. So again, that is displacing fish populations. So where fishermen like Gary were finding for years, traditional fishing grounds were very, very productive. They're now not, and the fish have disappeared, and they're turning up in places where they never used to, or disappearing completely. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. And then you've got the gravel extraction from the Crown Estates, and then you've got the marine dredging. I mean, look what's happened up in Teesside, where they've dredged out the Freeport there and dumped the spoil offshore, and that's just destroyed the lobster and crab fishery south as far as Whitby. So, this is what I'm saying about spatial competition. But of course, when it comes to the environmental lobby, the fishermen are always the low-hanging fruit, and they're the ones they'll go after.
Yeah. Where the hell do we go and start? I mean, where should we be encouraging? Because, I mean, I do everything that my son asks me to do. If he says, I really want to go and try... I mean, I've eaten a McDonald's twice now. Once because Callum made me go to a drive-through, and secondly because my son said we had to go there. So therefore I'm either forced to go to these places by bizarre photographers or my child. So I of the opinion is that usually most parents are influenced by their kids. So do you agree with me? Should we be getting youngsters to go and say
100%
fish?
Now you mentioned earlier, Richard, the school farm and country fair at the Suffolk Showground.
Yes.
So pre-pandemic, I've been involved with the Suffolk Show all my life, really. But I was on the organising committee of the school farm and country fair. And when I started working with the fishing industry, I kept up my involvement there, and we got the Billingsgate Seafood School to come down 2 years running, and got children sampling things like prawns and little bits of fish bites and cod cheeks and things like that, which we cooked up and served them, but also had an array of live shellfish, and we had a blockman there from Billingsgate filleting. And that's the way you get it's that grassroots. It's because children don't get exposed to that sort of stuff, so the more education, seafood in schools, things like that. I mean, we've got a great program going on in Grimsby with the UK Seafood Federation up there. They get fishermen to go into schools. Same in Peterhead. Some of the fishermen there will go into classes and talk about the industry. Covers two bases there. One is gets people or children interested in eating seafood, but also tells them that there actually is a career after school in seafood and fishing. Not really applicable if you're in the middle of the country, I know, but at least it exposes you to the realities of seafood and food production and gives you the opportunity to try these things. So yeah, it definitely grassroots education priority. But then what we noticed at the school farm fair is that although the level of knowledge amongst the children was virtually non-existent sometimes, so was the level of knowledge with the staff and the parent helpers. And that's really what got to me. Not so much the children, because you don't expect them to be, to have a grasp of seafood, but the parents and the staff members. That was really quite a galling thing to behold, and that really got me thinking. Well, actually, there is a business there in actually taking that knowledge from the coalface of the industry, from the net to plate, if you like, and educating people as to how that process works. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've just set up this initiative called Key Connections, which we launched last week, and I'm focusing mainly on hospitality at the moment, but also the media, because so much misinformation about the fishing industry, as you know, in mainstream media and on social media. And a lot of these, you hit on it earlier in the podcast about these influencers who stand up and talk, just absolute rubbish about products that they have no concept of, but they just want to make it look pretty, And of course, people just hog that into them, hook, line, and sinker. So what I want to do is just take the reality. And so with Key Connections, we've got and I've trialed it already with Wright Brothers in London with their chefs and their front of house staff. It's an hour and a half lecture, question and answer session called An Introduction to UK Fisheries, which I deliver. But we're going to couple that with port and harbour and market visits in Newlyn and Brixham, and up in Peterhead as well, hopefully, where we take groups of chefs and we get them aboard a vessel. We get them talking to fishermen, because I've done many tours before with chefs, and you get them into a market, and you get them onto a quayside, and it's like a bloody revelation. Their jaw drops to the floor, and they go, "Oh my God, I never knew it was like this." And that's where you start, because then they're at the coalface of their industry, and they can pass their knowledge on to the consumer. There's nothing worse than going into a restaurant for me and saying, "Where do the fish come from? Where does that bass come from?" And the waitress says, "The sea," and oh God,
Breaks Brothers. Yeah.
Breaks. Yeah. I'll go and ask the chef. You give them a little bit of education, and suddenly they've got an asset there, and then people will go because they're getting more of an experience. They're getting more value for their money when they've chosen that menu item.
Yeah. One of the most amazing cultures around seafood was when I went to Croatia. The restaurants there, because Croatia's not exactly it's becoming increasingly wealthy now, but it's always been a poorer country and had very simple food. They don't go crazy with flavors. They keep it very, very simple. So when you've got tourists like me coming over, they still keep everything simple, but the ingredients get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And as a result, the stuff comes literally straight from the sea to the plate. And you can buy what did I have? I had a scorpion fish one day, and it was one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten. And the waiter comes over and he insists on poking his eye repeatedly, showing you how black it is because it's literally just come from the sea.
So fresh.
And they appreciate it like it's the best thing ever. And it is. It's honest. It's truly delicious. The culture for them, they really understand it and respect it and treat it like it's just the most amazing thing. And I think we're probably missing that.
Yeah, right? We do. And you're absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head there. It is a cultural thing as well. And you go to some of these countries, you mentioned Croatia, but, Greece, Portugal, Spain, wherever. And the indigenous population have a much more of a connection to the sea per se, where they've got coasts, and they grow up with it. They cook from scratch. There aren't the processed foods. Perhaps, well, there are, but they have this culture ingrained in them where they know how to procure, and B, prepare, and then C, cook and deliver and eat. So it's as much about the knowledge of eating the fish sometimes that it is as cooking and actually catching it. And
Yeah.
that's what we've lost.
It's with your shellfish. Is it the same thing that we're all scared of it? Because I mean, we
absolutely.
as human beings, we used to love
oysters.
shellfish. I mean, I mean they were the poor man's food.
Poor man's protein.
We used to be, and so now they're considered a luxury. I mean, I heard, is this true, that basically the only reason why the Maine lobster became this rather posh thing was because a very canny fisherman said, well, let's make it out that it's rather hard to get. And it's really posh food, and so all of a sudden lobster became expensive, whereas actually it should have been cheap as chips. I mean, is that the case? I mean, oysters now considered as a rich man's luxury because some clever marketing man got hold of them, or are they just too few of them about? What do you think?
No, I mean not so much. I mean, you talk about Maine lobster. I mean, that's quite an interesting subject in itself, because the Maine lobster fishery came into existence really because the cod stocks on the Grand Banks collapsed. So lobster was one of the main sort of species that the cod would feed on. So once the cod stocks collapsed, and there was no cod to fish, the lobster population exploded. And so you've got then the fishermen turned to catching lobsters instead. So that's why they became popular. But oysters, I mean, every street corner in London in Victorian times had an oyster cellar on it. The wharves of New York were built on oyster shells, because it was such a popular staple, dietary staple. But I think again with the advent of consumerism and imported commoditized food from around the world, it's, let's face it, opening an oyster is a pretty hard way to get your protein hit. When you can go and buy a bloody chicken, and this is what we're up against, and so really the volumes of things like oysters dropped away, and it became more of a desirable product for those who were in the know, if you like.
So we're coming up to probably the end of the episode here. At least I've got about 1,000 other questions I want to ask you. You should have your own podcast about the sea, Mike.
Well, funnily enough, we're actually on a project at the moment, not to do a podcast, but to do a series of videos with some chefs, and to tell that whole net to plate story. So shooting them on location in fishing ports, and that's
shooting fish.
Well, shooting the video.
Oh right, sorry.
I do know a guy that shoots a lot of nice videos, and also takes lots of nice photographs.
Yeah, we also know
really?
Callum as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Trying to blag more work. Mike, where can people find more about you? Where do you want people to go to next after listening to this podcast?
Best thing to do is go to the website, so www.passionforseafood.com. But I'm also quite prolific on Instagram, and will continue to do so. There's one or two little films floating about. I mentioned the herring film. There are links to all of these things on the website, so that's the best place to land.
And it's a passionforseafood.com
Yeah.
for the website, and at a passion for seafood on Instagram.
That's right.
Your Instagram is really good as well. It's a really good slice all the way through the fishing industry, but linking it to food at every level. I really like the way you've communicated things there.
Yeah, I do quite a few food festivals as well. Doing cookery demos and talk, but preparing the fish and talking about the fishing industry, so people can come and see me at. We're doing Ludlow this year. We're doing St Ives Food Festival in Cornwall on the beach in May, and then Aldborough Food Festival at Snake Maltings, where I run the seafood stage for 2 days, which is brilliant, and that's a lovely platform to engage
That's
with people
a great
from.
thing.
If you are listening to this as you are a patron of ours and you support us over on Patreon, then thank you so much for doing it. We've had a few more sign-ups this month. You really are helping keep the lights on. And if you're not subscribed already, then, well, why should you? Well, you support us, you help us achieve things. We think you're a lovely person for doing it. And also, you get extra content. You get extra long episodes because we've started to cut these down to cut out the ramblings. But the ramble stuffed episodes are all available over on our Patreon. So go along to the link that's in the show notes, in the bit that comes in with the text bit under the episode in your podcast app. There's all sorts of links and stuff there. You can find out more about the host. Normally one of us has written an article for Scribehound, so we're spamming that at the same time. You'll find all of the links for Mike and all of his stuff and key connections and his Instagram there. And I think that's it. Is there anything else we want to plug or mention at the end of the episode?
I'd like to say, please share this podcast because we have terrible discoverability and there's no like algorithm magic that sends this to absolutely everyone. So if you think you have friends, some people do. I don't have a social life. But if you do have friends or people that follow you on the internet, maybe share this podcast with them and they can also enjoy ramblings for like an hour and a half when it should have been significantly less.
And reviews. Reviews, please.
Oh, yeah.
Review it on your podcast app of choice. What do you want to say, Mr. Hedgelayer?
I've got a request, is that I think everyone should follow Mike on his social media stuff. And then once you've followed him, I think he'd be delighted to see that if you've actually bought some British fish and you've cooked it, show him what you've done. Because I find,
100%.
right, if I just talk about random stuff saying, oh, I hate Rachel Reeves because she's destroyed the countryside, I get 25 likes. If I show a beautiful laid hedge, 4,000 people go, this is wonderful, and they go, I think your work's great. And at the end of the day, the fisherman going out there and risking his arse every single time he goes to sea is bringing food back. And I think it'd be a great thing if you could help Mike spread his word, so all our listeners are largely interested in food, because it's one of the things that we think. Show him what you've cooked and why. And it might just inspire someone else to go to their fishmonger or their supermarket and say, why are you selling that Vietnamese shit? I want herring because I want to make this. And it might just start filtering through. I think people power. So let's flood Mike's social media with other people saying, I've just cooked this. So some badly boiled cod.
Yes. Boiled cod in salt water with nothing else. Maybe some white sauce.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Just like I had at school.
Thank you very much, Mike, for coming along. And
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I apologise for Callum, Mike. Thank you for coming on. It was enlightening. I've learnt huge amounts, and I know that our listeners too. So thank you, chum. That was a really fascinating
you're
hour
welcome.
and a half
Really,
we've had.
my pleasure.